On behalf of the Global Media Education Council, I'm delighted to welcome you to the 26th day of our 75-part webinar series, which is the Global Communication Education Conclave. As you might know, we formed this Global Media Education Council earlier this year, and you might have seen the plans that we have in mind for the future. And one of the things that we've started off with is this 75-part series to celebrate 75 years of Indian independence. And we've had workshops, we've had research projects, and we've had curriculum development arrangements and all these things coming up in future. And we'll need the support of all the stalwarts that we have in today's panel, right from our mentor and guru, Professor F.B. Khan, Professor Kanchan Kaur, and Ms. Aditi Tandon. With your help, we've been able to sustain this for so long, and I'm sure we'll be able to contribute our bit in the days to come as well. There's an academic writing workshop that we've started recently in association with the Institute for International Journalism and the South Asia Communication Association based in USA. So these are some of these things that we are carrying on with. And all this has been possible because of these brilliant working committee colleagues who have set up these webinars on a day-to-day basis. And we've been promoting diverse voices, diverse perspectives, diverse epistemologies. And we've had working committee members from Arunachal to Goa and from Kashmir to Kerala, literally in every sense of the term. And there have been days when we've had distinct flavors. And today is a distinct Indian flavor. But the last 2 days, one of those days we had majority of participants from Tamil Nadu, for example. The other day we had majority of participants from Punjab, for example. And I must take this opportunity to thank our brilliant colleague, Ms. Ghazala Yasmin, who is the moderator for the day. And I have the pleasant task of introducing Ghazala to today's audience. She is the head of Department of Journalism and Mass Communication at Alia University. Empaneled with the Ministry of Information and Cultural Affairs, she is a renowned documentary filmmaker, and she makes documentaries on issues of gender and minority representations. And a presiding theme of her work is problematizing notions of self and the other, of normality and deviance, of local and the global through diverse narratives. Ghazala is also an alumnus of the IBLP program of the United States Department of State, which is the International Visitors Leadership Program on Education and Activism for Young Women, 2017. She was one of the 24 representatives from 24 countries. So she was the lone representative from India for that program for that year. She's working with fellow IBLP alumnus to expand the impact of her work. She's also been an official delegate to a professional leadership program to the People's Republic of China. The program was entitled Women Changemakers, Harboring Hope, Fostering Growth 2019. And she's focused on women empowerment, poverty alleviation, education, and economic opportunities. And the delegation exchanged notes with the women leaders, provincial heads, and various ethnic minorities in China as well. She is also a certified Google News network trainer on global misinformation and disinformation. And she has trained more than 200 journalists, media professionals, and students to verify and debunk fake news. She's a member of the Curriculum Advisory Board for the BBC Young Reporter, and that's a global project to impart media literacy at the school level. She's also a national resource person for conducting online lecture videos for the Ministry of Human Resource Development, University Grants Commission. She's an alumnus of MCRC Jamia Millia Islamia. And she is, as I said, a renowned filmmaker, a policy analyst, a regular panelist on TV programs and television debates. And there is so much to say about Ghazala, but we also have other important things to do. And I again welcome all the distinguished guests, and it is my honor to just give a sneak preview of what is to happen. Our very own Professor F.B. Khan will be honored with an achievement award today. So GMEC is honored to be able to provide this platform for Professor Khan as well. So thank you, friends and colleagues, and looking forward to a very interesting session ahead. Over to you, Ghazala, now.
Thank you so much, Dr. Uma Shankar Pandey. Dr. Uma Shankar Pandey is the Vice President of this newly formed, very unconventional and a very promising body of global media educators. It's called the Global Media Education Council. And I'm a working committee member at the council. So on behalf of GMAC, I welcome you all to this Global Communication Enclave, Communication Education Conclave. We've been running a series of webinars, around 75 webinars to celebrate 75 years of India's independence. And today's session specifically deals with media, misinformation, and climate. So at the outset, I take this opportunity to welcome all our esteemed and distinguished speakers on the panel. To begin with, Professor Kanchan Kaur. She's the Dean with the Indian Institute of Journalism and New Media, Bengaluru. We have Professor Farhad Bashir Khan. He's been my personal mentor and my professor during my post-graduation days at Jamia. And when we come to his felicitation part, we'll get to know all the pioneering work that he's done in the field of media education and design. Of course, we have somebody who needs no introduction in the field of debunking fake news and misinformation and disinformation. Mr. Prateek Sinha is there on this panel, and very honored and delighted to have a dear friend and a fellow Google News Initiative trainer, Aditi Tandon. She's working as the production editor with Mongabe, and she's doing some very interesting work, and I'm sure Aditi will enlighten us about her work in doing debunking misinformation in climate change stories. That's a very niche area which a lot of people don't know about. So let us come to the core issue that we have today. We already know that false or misleading information is a growing problem, so much so that even the WHO was compelled to call it the infodemic during the recent COVID-19 pandemic. If I give you an example, a recent example, an image of clusters of aeroplanes claiming that they were private jets and they were being used by leaders of the COP26 Glasgow summit. There were also some other images which showed diesel generators being used at the conference, and they all claimed that there was hypocrisy that was there, that when these people were talking about climate change and climate mitigation, climate disaster mitigation. Well, these all pictures that went viral on the net were the deceptive images that circulated on social news media during the climate summit. And while these images were debunked and misleading claims soon went, went viral too, but the damage was already done. So climate change related misinformation is emerging as the new tool to fuel something what we call polarization, as was observed in the COP26 climate change summit. And these were the concerns which formed the very genesis on this Global Media Education Council's webinar on media, misinformation, and climate. And in this context, may I take this opportunity to invite our first speaker of the day, who, like I said, actually needs no introduction, one of the pioneering crusaders against this war on misinformation and disinformation, somebody who abandoned his cushy job as a software engineer in the US to initiate one of the first most credible fact-checking platforms in India. Yes, I'm talking about the co-founder and editor of Alt News. Over to you, Mr. Prateek Sinha. The stage is all yours. Please unmute yourself.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that kind introduction, Ghazala. And I'm glad to be on this forum, especially because it's an educational forum. And that is something that we have started looking at as an organization. That's what we've been looking at for the past almost more than a year now. And, I went to the GMEC website, and, in a question of why GMEC, it says that there's a widespread belief that much of the existing media education is not adequate. And I completely agree with this view that the media, the education that we have in this country, especially when it comes to media and information, is not adequate. And that is one of the primary reasons why we stand today, where political parties and certain organizations are using misinformation in an absolute organized manner to target individuals of this country, to target critical voices, and especially to target minorities. And when I say that misinformation is being used in an organized manner, what I mean is that whenever there's a news event, and by news event, I mean something major that happens in the nation, whether it's Balakot, whether it's 2019 elections, whether it is something that's happening in Jamia or JNU, or farmers' protests, or COVID, and especially the Tablighi Jamaat incident, all of these are news incidents where there's an inflection in the amount of sort of attention that national media gives to these incidents. And every time there is one such inflection, what we as an organization have noticed that there is an absolute organized form of production of disinformation. And the reason for that is that it has been realized over time. Alt News started sometime in 2017, February 2017. And at that point in time, we would probably debunk 5, 6, 7 stories a day. And these days, sometimes we end up debunking 8 to 10 stories a day. Not every day, but there are times when we would end up debunking 8 to 10 stories a day. And the reason for that is that various political parties in this country, in India, and especially the right-wing political party, BJP, has realized that disinformation is a very, very powerful tool to shape narratives. And anytime a popular narrative needs to be tweaked, what needs to be done is put out disinformation/misinformation in an organized manner, so that instead of ingesting facts, people ingest propaganda. And that is the role that over the past couple of years, past 3 years especially, that there is an increasing amount of mainstreaming of disinformation. And it does not end on social media. A lot of us think that misinformation and disinformation is a product of social media. But in case of India, the misinformation and disinformation also extends largely to mainstream media, where even corner case social media claims are put out on mainstream media, claiming that this is what is being claimed on social media. We have not verified, but it is being claimed on social media. As we grew up, or what we knew was it is. Sorry, I stay next to a train. As we grew up, what we know is that it was the job of the media to verify information and inform its users with verified information. But what has happened now is that media is the one which is increasingly propagating unverified information, unsourced information, anonymous information. And and along with that, along with media organizations, there are, especially during the time of COVID, there have been different companies who have used unverified claims to make lots of profit. People have claimed that there are drugs which can prevent COVID, and these claims have been again put forward by mainstream media. For an example would be Patanjali's Coronel. And these sort of claims have been put forward by mainstream media, and people have spent money on these drugs en masse. So disinformation has also become a tool for financial success. That is, if you can successfully, using a propaganda machinery, convince people at large that something is true, even if it is not, then people will spend money to buy, whether it's a drug or a product. So, as I said, I'm glad to be speaking on this forum because while we have been doing journalism as an organization, we've been approaching this issue of disinformation and misinformation as a journalistic body for about 5 years now. In Feb 2021 will be 5. Feb 2022 will be 5, and we've been approaching this issue as a journalistic body for 5 years now. But what we realize is that while journalism is a very important tool to raise awareness, and I think Alt News as an organization has played its part in raising awareness around the issue of misinformation and disinformation in India, but journalism is not a very good tool to alleviate a social issue. And here I'm categorically sort of terming the issue of misinformation and disinformation as a social issue, because it has become so widespread that every single household in this country is affected by misinformation and disinformation. And that is when one can term it as a social issue. And such a social issue cannot be alleviated just using journalism. Journalism is a great tool to raise awareness that, look, this is the issue. But as far as the alleviation of the issue, that is, what do we do to deal with the issue? What we really need is a new subject across India. The subject is called information literacy, and it is already being taught in multiple schools in Scandinavian countries like Finland, etc. And the results are there to see. For example, there have been studies which have been done of students from Finland versus students from the US, and in terms of how do they look at information, how much misinformation they fall for. And the Finnish students are way ahead of the American counterparts just because they have these dedicated courses in information literacy. And what is information literacy? Information literacy basically trains you from your formative ages, ages maybe even as young as 8, 9, and very often around 11, 12, where you are still forming your opinions, etc., where you're still trying to forming your basic skills. Information literacy creates this most basic skill that is needed in every individual, is how to look at information, how to differentiate between emotionally charged information versus something which is legitimate information. And this differentiation is very important because the primary tool that producers of misinformation and disinformation use is to create emotionally charged information. That is, every time you create a piece of disinformation, especially the caption that you see, you'll see a video, you'll see a photo, and then you'll see a caption. The caption is designed in a way to affect you at an emotional level, so that you get carried over with your emotions and probably press the forward button or internalize information. There are many countries who are now making policy changes in their, not many countries, a few countries are making policy changes in their educational curriculum to include this issue of information, include the subject of information literacy, so that the next generation of adults is not as susceptible to the generation of adults that we see now. And this is where India is lacking big time, because one can imagine, let's say, one can say that BJP is a political party because they have directly or indirectly gaining from misinformation, not interested in introducing a subject such as information literacy. But if you look at even the non-BJP states in India, and education in India is a state subject, even if you look at the non-BJP states in India, not a single state has introduced the subject of information literacy. Not a single state has done any kind of policy reforms to deal with the issue of misinformation, that is. So where we are today is that we have different political parties using disinformation in an organized manner, and as a society we have no way to counter it. Coming briefly, because I have only 10 minutes, so I just want to cover one last point. And coming briefly to the issue, we have spoken about the government and the political parties, but there is another stakeholder here, and that is the social media platforms such as Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. And and because these platforms, they consider themselves as part of the solution, but as somebody who's working very closely with these platforms, I consider them as part of the problem. That is, they are doing a lot of harm because of their basic motive of extreme profiteering, where their business models um, are aimed at making maximum profit without seeing what consequences these social media platforms are having on the society and human rights of especially the underprivileged. And we have seen activities on platforms like Facebook which have even led to exodus, like the Rohingya exodus. Just in this very month, in the first week of this month, about 150 Rohingyas have sued Facebook for the exodus that happened in Myanmar, and the exodus happened because the military in Myanmar created several fake Facebook pages and put out hate speech and misinformation in organized manner. So the social media platforms are also a big, big problem in this whole equation, and they also need to be dealt with a lot of caution, and also they need to be made accountable. So this is the general issue of misinformation, disinformation in India. Thanks for listening to me.
Thank you so much, Prateek, for giving an overview of the situation, the problem that exists with regard to information, misinformation and disinformation, especially in the Indian context. You've kind of, set the stage right, because the problem I feel in India, especially when we talk in the purview of climate misinformation and disinformation, is more of a lack of knowledge and a confusion of terms that are being used as a kind of solutions to be offered, strategies to be offered towards mitigation of climate disasters. Coming now to focus on the primary issue that we are in discussion today, there is a kind of a fairly convinced public which believes that climate change is real, and there are efforts which are being done to intentionally spread misinformation and disinformation in order to confuse people with the solutions. And this is also done to preserve the financial interests of certain traditional sectors and to prevent countries for being able to take a robust interventions in, say, against fossil fuel industries and technologies that kind of weaken the process of fighting climate change. So in an effort to kind of categorically define misinformation and disinformation and call it a spade in climate action issues, there are a lot of NGOs and policy advocates who are working in this area, and they've even released an open letter at COP26 where they've proposed an action plan that can kind of give you a blueprint to counter misinformation and disinformation. And the idea, they say, is that we need to kind of fight against the false solutions and delays that kind of hold up urgent actions against climate change. So in this context, I would like to invite Ms. Aditi Tandon. Aditi is a production editor with the environment news portal Mongabe, the India network. She has over 15 years of experience in media and communications, and she's also a fact-checking trainer with Google News Initiative, the India Training Network. So over to you, Aditi. Please use this forum to explain how you are trying to tackle this menace.
Thank you, Ghazala. So hello, everyone. Thanks for taking time to join in today. And thank you to Global Media Education Council for this session on a very important issue of media misinformation and climate change. It's not spoken about enough, but I think it is growing. And I will talk more about what I have observed by working at Mongabe, India. So I'm a journalist with Mongabe India, which is an environment news portal. And like Ghazala mentioned, I'm a fact-checking trainer with the Google News Initiatives India Training Network. And since I work with an environment publication specifically, we observe climate change related news, research, policy, narratives every day. And when the topic of climate misinformation comes up, a lot of people, including friends in the media, ask us that, is climate misinformation really a big problem in India? Because in India, we've seen, how political or health-related misinformation has become widespread. And comparatively, climate misinformation is not so widespread or problematic in India yet. And I say yet because through my conversations and research and stories on this subject, it could be a problem very soon. Globally, it is already a problem. And it's not because people don't believe in climate change. So we've moved on from that climate denial phase that used to be there in the US and certain other countries. The reasons now are different. People or organizations are spreading climate misinformation, either for creating an environment for polarization. And in that polarized environment, political or communal misinformation also gets traction, or they're doing it for monetary benefit. And there are funders of climate misinformation in some countries. In India, we don't see that too much as yet. What we do see often in India is a poor interpretation of science, or using incomplete context when explaining climate science. We're seeing this in India, and in media specifically, we don't have too many specialized journalists on the subject, but that is okay, as in not every journalist is supposed to know all the science. But what we're expected to do, and again, this comes into the education sphere and literacy about media, even as journalists, we are expected to investigate, we're expected to ask enough questions, and we're expected to explain information to make the science accessible to readers without compromising on accuracy. And I'd just like to share a short presentation because there's some examples that I'd like to share. Is everyone able to see these examples? Ghazala also brought them up. In case you're not able to see them, please just unmute and let me know. So these are two examples I wanted to highlight from the very recent COP26, the UN Climate Conference in Glasgow that ended early this month. Both these images, one of diesel generators on the left and one of clusters of aeroplanes on the right, were being circulated with misleading captions. And they were debunked, but the intent was obvious that there are attempts to undermine this climate negotiation process. That in turn would reduce support from the public. It would confuse public, make them wonder, is this really required? Is a conference of parties really required? And with that lowering support, action on climate change would get delayed. So like I mentioned, there's no longer an outright denial of climate change. People have come to the consensus, more or less, that yes, it exists. But there are efforts to delay any action on it. There are efforts to undermine conferences which try and take action towards it. And this was perhaps the first COP where climate misinformation was being observed and analyzed by global groups. There was attempts to bring in, a formalization of climate misinformation. And also the reason why this has become very important is because the people analyzing this climate misinformation have realized that the tactics used for climate misinformation globally are the same as the tactics used in extremist content or migration-related misinformation. So they're seeing the same kind of tactics using climate as the subject, and that's where there is concern that this could become something worse than what it already is. So on the screen, I've just listed some of the trends that were noticed. Of course, misleading images and videos were being circulated, which has become the norm with every major event these days. But what analysts also noticed was there was an increase in conflict of ideologies, or culture wars, as they're called. So it was either between countries, between the global north versus global south, so blocks of countries, youth activists versus corporates. And the basis of many of these conflicts was often true, but the narrative that either the country or the media or certain actors looking to delay progress took was polarizing. And in this polarized narrative, which is like, it's not us, it's them kind of narrative, what it creates is a situation where misinformation can come in, where it can thrive, where it prevents collective action from happening, which is the core of a conference like this. And the purpose of a conference like this gets derailed. There was greenwashing, which is basically putting out information that sounds like a solution, but doesn't actually work. And much of this was done to pollute the information landscape, to confuse people, and to delay action, and to reduce public support for climate change on a global platform. And before I talk a little about what we can do as media or as educators to prevent misinformation, I just want to raise why climate misinformation particularly is problematic. Some of this we see with most kinds of misinformation that's out there. So inaccurate information, whether it's climate or otherwise, it confuses people. They don't know whom to trust, and there's so much of information overload that it becomes difficult to get to the accurate information. Climate misinformation specifically, it undermines work of scientists, and the trust in science goes down, which is again a dangerous path to go along. And more dangerous is that it becomes a subject to fuel polarization, like was mentioned earlier as well. We've seen it in other types of misinformation. We've seen that when there is this kind of polarization, what the subject is somehow gets lost by the end of it. It just becomes a tool to attack us and them. And even worse is that it can reduce public support for any policy or any action towards climate change. And overall, it causes delays in action. And this delay benefits certain parties. And whether it's fossil fuel companies or other people with interests in keeping climate action at bay, it supports their agenda in a subtle way. So where do you start? Like, what do you do? And this is a question we get very often because it is not easy. Climate change is not an easy subject. It is a very complex and a very nuanced subject. And people are not, people including me also, I would say, working in the environment space, it's difficult to wrap your head around every nuance of everything about climate change. But a few things that as journalists or as media people or as media educators that we can do is, before actually getting to reporting or fact checking, develop a healthy sense of skepticism. I think this is across subjects. It's just a core of journalism about asking questions, about investigating, just being skeptical of information that is put in front of you. And of course, educating yourself a bit more on the subject, because right now climate misinformation has not hit us the way it has hit some other countries. But if we, to use a COVID word, inoculate ourselves against this by educating ourselves, by reading up, by looking at multiple opinions on the issue, by reading diverse opinions and diverse media, it would help us develop a sense of what climate change and its nuances are, which could help us, when misinformation comes our way, we can be like, okay, I've read about this, let me investigate further and ask more questions. And one way to do due diligence on the sources, it's important to make sure that, are they really experts on the subject? Do they have an agenda? Because this is something that is seen in climate change reporting, where an expert may not be really an expert or may be funded by someone for speaking on a certain subject or speaking against a certain subject. So it's important to do due diligence on the subject. It's important to get into the technical details, because climate change is a technical topic. And from my experience, what I've seen is that we are often afraid to ask questions to scientists or to people who have technical expertise, because we feel maybe we don't understand enough. It sounds like a silly question, but it's not. As journalists, our job is to ask questions to make it simple for ourselves before we go out and make it simple for the audience. And so it's absolutely fine to get into very specific details about where was the location, what is the methodology, what does this number mean. And one thing which I've put here is that all that's green, all that we're taught about environment, which is, plant a lot of trees and all of that, it's not necessarily always good. And I've, given the example of planting trees. I just mentioned it because if a scientist says plant 1 million trees, we can save the environment, it sounds like a great thing. But as a journalist, we cannot take that at face value. There are many layers to it. What are the kind of trees? Because if you plant the wrong kind of tree, it can harm the local biodiversity. Where is it being planted? All these are questions to ask. And I've put an example of a story on Assam floods, which was portrayed in 2 different ways in Indian media at the same time. One talks about why annual floods are essential, and one talks about the devastating effect of annual floods. So even if you imagine floods as being devastating, that's the obvious narrative to take because that's what we've been taught. But when you explore further, there are, and Indian Express covered this, and Monga Bay India also covered this, about why annual floods are essential for the survival of this national park and the biodiversity in Assam. And before closing up, I'd like to share a link. I'll probably do it in the chat about a story we did recently about climate misinformation at COP26, which goes into details of some of the things I spoke about. And with that, I'd just like to end this presentation. I hope I've kept it within time, Ghazala, but yeah.
That was a wonderful presentation, Aditi. Thank you so much for a very rounded, succinct presentation on such a niche area, something which actually is very complex, not just to the general public at large, but even to us media educators. And you've kind of covered it beautifully. You've talked about the possible reasons as to why misinformation in climate is something which needs to be looked at as we brace up for more and more impact of global warming and global warming related events. You also pointed out to the fact that it's a complex science and it's often misinterpreted in amongst journalists and reporters who do climate change stories, but they are not well versed with the nuances of the terms and the strategies and the tools to mitigate climate disasters. You've really brilliantly summarized how the climate misinformation can be disastrous, and you have also kind of pointed out how media can be cognizant of climate misinformation and avoid spreading wrong information against climate misinformation. I think to add on more to that, we will have our session chair, Dr. Professor Kanchan Kaur, who will be kind of taking us on a way forward, talking about how to kind of negotiate this very tricky terrain. But before that, let me just kind of reiterate that today we are very honored and privileged to have Professor Kanchan Kaur, who is the Dean of the Indian Institute of Journalism and New Media in Bengaluru. She's been working as a reporter for many, many years, for quite a few decades. And I would now like to request her to honor and to felicitate our eminent media educator this evening, whom Global Media Education Council feels honored to bestow upon with the Lifetime Achievement Award. So over to you, Professor Kanchan Kaur.
Thank you, Ghazala. Thanks very much for giving me the responsibility of felicitating Professor Khan over here. I'm just going to, he's got so many, he's done so many things over 4 decades that the list is really, really long. So I have sort of condensed it a bit, and I'm just going to mention only at the surface of what he's done. He's a distinguished author, media practitioner, media and communication design innovator. He has, like I said, over 4 decades of leadership experience in academic teaching, research, administration, and industry practice. He played a key role in setting up media departments, institutions, and universities across the country. He has served Jamia Millia Islamia on several prestigious positions, including the Maulana Abul Kalam Azad Chair, professor of media and communication, and outside as founder director and professor of the Academy for Photographical Excellence. Presently, he is setting up a cutting-edge department of design and innovation at Jamia Millia Islamia and is its founding head and professor of media and communication design innovation. He's done seminal work in the nascent field of political visual communication, contributing immensely to the discipline with his path-breaking book, Game of Words, Visual Media Politics and Elections in the Digital Era. This was published by Sage, where he examines how visual campaigns and communication design has affected the evolution of democracy and election campaigns. This book has become one of the most important works in the current body of literature in visual and political communication internationally. But Professor Khan's interest firmly lies in deepening democracy, something we really, really need just now. His work has expanded the national and cybersecurity dialogue to include the end user perspective, especially from marginalized communities, minorities, and underrepresented stakeholder groups, putting public interest at the core of policy formulation. We're very honored on behalf of the GMEC, I'm very honored to present to you the Lifetime Achievement Award. Professor Khan.
Thank you so much, Professor Kanchan Kaur. May I please request the host of the meeting to play the felicitation video for Professor Farhad Bashir Khan. I guess, Ghazal, are you there? The technical team, can somebody please play the Lifetime Achievement video? Yes. Thank you so much, the technical team. With all the accolades, and I think we have not been able to do justice, as Professor Kaur would agree with me, to this enormous list of accomplishments which Professor F.B. Khan has. But I would just like to point out, the pride that I feel, because I have been personally mentored by him when I was a student at AGK Mass Communication Center, Jamia Millia Islamia. So really honored and privileged to have you here, sir, and accept the award. Over to you. For your deliberation and for your note and your presidential address.
Thanks a lot, Ghazala, and really happy to be among you all. And I'm really proud that MCRC is churning out your kind of people, which include Pulitzer Prize winners and a lot of those award people. I'm really humbled with the award which you have chosen me for this, and so let's start on what we were talking about, and I think I have a presentation. I just made it here, and so I would like to quickly go over that presentation and say that I would be like in today's world, we are multitasking. So the time is only 10 minutes. So I'll be multitasking with the slides. And so there would be some written material, something I would be speaking. So please allow me to present my presentation.
Sure, sir. Please go ahead. Professor Khan will be speaking on media and democracy in India.
So this is So for today's lecture, I would like to just say that you all know that we are a huge amount of a big media ecosystem in which we live, and there are media users which are like there are publication where there are 100,000. There are number of copies which are about 240 million copies. Internet users, there are 448 million social media users, and these people engage with all the media, and that's very unique thing about India, that even print literacy is going up, as it is now receding in other countries, but here it's going up. And there are people who are reading news on the internet, and they spend about 2 hours and 26 minutes. And there are people who watch TV, which is 3 hours, 16 minutes, which is a huge engagement. And with that engagement, and we know that the role of media has entirely changed, and it now focusing more on selling and entertaining rather than bringing people closer and spread awareness. And probably this forum is much needed to do that. And we all know, and we discussed that this whole idea of when we moved from a model which was earlier a fee-based broadcasting system to a media which is run on advertisement and TRPs, things changed, and still people are looking at revenue models and which would fund these. And we are thinking, and I'm also contributing in some forums about what the new model for funding these media TRPs and other thing can't fund a robust media which is right now with us. So this is what is happening with the commercialization, that now we are the journalism, and the journalism, that true journalism, when we speak to power and call a spade, is now changing. And so this is P. Sainath saying this. Now the leaders are also creating their own bigger niche, where they are speaking directly to people. And so there's another phenomena which is happening. The other thing about the climate change is that in 2006 to 2018 there was a constant kind of increase in the coverage, but today, after 2020, very strangely, even because the COVID was there, but we were looking at the coverage started decreasing, shrinking. In India also, it gone much below. In at least in 1920, it was quite low. Where we see climate news mostly on television, which is not a very viewed medium compared to other mediums. Online, from major news organization contribute only 15%. Then and the least are social media posts, printed newspaper, radio. These are the places where these news are not, we are not looking at these news. This whole idea of misinformation, as rightly told by esteemed panelists, we in 2021 we got the fake news coverage became to 214%. The fake news about this global social media misinformation on COVID rose to 18%. We became number one in forwarding messages on WhatsApp, and mostly WhatsApp forwards, as all of us know, are fake. Now, what is the whole harm of fake? Fake news is actually, as we all know, is manipulated by people and with vested interest. They are not real people. Sometimes they are bots. Sometimes they are fake accounts, and one person would be handling several accounts to do this. But this whole idea of fake news assumes importance because the priming done by the fake news, number one, changes the perception. Number two, that the response to real news diminishes. And everything becomes so confused that a direct, constructive message does not find trust in people. So that is the bigger long-term harm these propagandists would do to the entire ecosystem. Now, if I go to I looked with a lot of interest this Edelman's Trust barometer, which each year come out with a trust report. The 2020 trust was competence and ethics, and I think we have to take these two into consideration if we have to do a effective media coverage on climate change. It should now be done with some kind of crisis communication, and where people with ethical framework should be highlighted, and a newer strategy need to be put. Now, visuals are assuming huge importance in this era. Everybody understand that tweets with images receive several times more for retweets, likes, and other things. If you look, 300 hours of video are uploaded every minute, 5 billion video views per day on YouTube. These are like huge numbers. And I'll again say that images, because they directly communicate to you without barrier of lot of things. Of course, you require a context. Without a context, the images don't do anything. But if you give a certain kind of context, they directly go into your and you think about it, and it becomes your own personal view. So these visuals need to come in forefront in all the campaign which are based on communication plans for climate change. I did a huge study. It was a big study on why Modi won, and I looked at a lot of newspapers, other side posters, did a lot of interviews, and found out that the photographs, his positioning there made a huge role. And that positioning where you can see Modi with a lot of photos and all, so he was using, so there was visibility. So, and we can learn a lot to do a climate change campaign like this. The pictures were generating more interest. They have a strong body language, varied facial expression, a strategic tone of the photographs. These all created interest. And it was greatly focused campaign. So there were no several leaders. So on a climate change, we can actually strategize the information. So nowadays there's whole scattering of information, and there should be an agenda that these things need to be focused, so that the one by one we bring in a greater focus on those areas which where we want to put attention. Of course, that would result in better retention, higher engagement, and deeper association with this. And what I want to now, in the end, I only had 10 minutes, so and want to show you a probably first commercial video where which was done by Johnson. It was for Johnson's presidential campaign. At that time, even nationalism was at the highest level in U.S. Elections, and the Republican candidates were saying that we should do atomic bomb to suppress dissent in several places where U.S. was has intruded into those small little countries. And Johnson won hugely. I won't say this as an example video because Johnson himself took it out from, because it's very violent. He took it out from the channel, but he got so much earned view. He just paid once for this ad on the national television, but rest of, and he pulled it out, but rest, it created so many earned views, and so much debate was around it that it was shown again and again. And everybody knows that Johnson won with a huge margin because one of the important factor was this. So I'll end my presentation with this, if it runs, or if it doesn't run, then it will. So so this is a very nice 1 minute video, and which focuses on the eye of that small little kid.
From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
One sec. Yeah. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 6, 8, 9, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. These are the stakes to make a world in which all of God's children can live, or to go into the dark. We must either love each other or we must die.
Vote for President Johnson on November 3rd. The stakes are too high for you to stay home.
So with this, I would like
This has been a presentation.
So I'll stop my presentation with this, and really honored and happy to receive this award, and I would try to prove worthy of this in my future, whatever I do. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. It means a lot, and thank you for that wonderful presentation. Thank you for humbling us by accepting the award. If I may just add on, of course, the list is endless, but if I can just add on, one very particular bit about Professor F.B. Khan. Well, his interest lies in areas which can deepen democracy, and his work has really expanded the national and the cybersecurity dialogue to include the end user perspective, especially from marginalized communities, minorities, and the underrepresented stakeholders. So thank you so much, sir, for adding on your valuable perspective on areas to combat climate misinformation, how this can be made a viable field, how it can be brought onto the dialogue platforms, and like visuals, for example, you said could be one tool which can be used to engage in creating more awareness about climate disasters and areas with which we can prevent such kind of disasters. Coming to now the final presentation of the day, that would be by Professor Kanchan Kaur. Like I already mentioned, Professor Kaur has honored us by chairing this session on media misinformation and climate. Her topic of discussion would be fighting disinformation, a holistic approach. There have been efforts to combat climate misinformation, and even our social media platforms have been trying to do their bit, claiming to do their bit. For example, Twitter has said this in advance of COP26 that it would feature pre-bunks, and these pre-bunks would be basically small hubs of credible and authoritative information regarding the factual context of climate change, and they also said that they would incorporate key themes like science backing climate change and global warming realities. Google also has tried to address climate change denial by declaring that it will prohibit any kind of monetization. It would prevent ads and advertisements which will contradict the well-established scientific consensus around the reasons and the ramifications of causes social climate change. But all this still needs a vast area to be covered, because like Aditi, like Prateek Sinha, and like Professor F.B. Khan has already pointed out, that there is this huge boomerang kind of an effect which has happened, which has fueled climate misinformation so much so that it has become a very, very critical issue that needs to be discussed. So let us just now go to our expert on the panel, Professor Kanchan Kaur, who will guide us to the way forward. Over to you, Professor Kanchan Kaur.
Thank you, Ms. Yasmin, for such a wonderful introduction. Good evening, everyone. It has been a wonderful evening of absolutely clear insights from such eminent people. Prateek, as always, has been very clear about how misinformation is being spread in an organized manner, and how social media platforms are really part of the problem, though they say they are part of the solution. And of course, as he said, the important role information literacy plays in countering the flow of misinformation is what I'm going to be actually talking about towards the end. Aditi's work in the area of environment has been extremely important. The problem of climate misinformation may only be germinating in the country just now, but as she mentioned, it is linked to a lot of other misinformation problems like polarization and ignoring scientific evidence as well. The effort to undermine negotiations at COP26, as well as the need for public support for climate change, needs to be countered. Again, here it's really important to make science understandable to people without actually losing out on the accuracy of the information. And developing healthy skepticism has always been good for everyone. Professor Khan's reiteration of how a democracy can't function without a fully functional media can never be clearer than today, when there seem to be upheavals in both democracy and the media. As he said, fake news breaks the authenticity of the news ecosystem. It changes the way people respond to real news, and most importantly, really undermines democracy. I was asked for a presentation, so I have a small one. I will try and share screen in a minute. If you will just hold on. Here we go. So as we were saying, an informed citizenry is what makes democracy work. Citizens vote on the basis of the information they have about candidates, policy, corruption, governance, and so on. But if this information becomes untrustworthy, the democratic process can be completely undermined. Now, misinformation is not new. It is something that's been around since ages, whether it was in myths and legends like the Trojan horse, or in the then newer forms of communication like newsletters and newspapers. The rivalry between Joseph Pulitzer and William Hearst, and the consequent yellow journalism is well known. Even today, tabloids and other salacious papers do tell us stories that are hardly true or spread information that is suspect. Radio and TV have also helped in the spread of misinformation. And the fact that these are powerful media has made matters really worse. Now, studies have found that most people get their understanding of politics and democracy through what influencers like television anchors, for instance, have to say. And they make their opinions based on the secondhand, often incorrect information. The misinformed, shows research, hold their incorrect beliefs with confidence, and they might participate at very high levels. The uninformed citizenry, researchers say, might not pose a threat to democracy, but a largely misinformed citizenry may misdirect electoral outcomes and the general direction of policy. Now, social media has not just democratized access to media, but also the writing, publishing, and the spreading of it. With newspapers and the printing press, everyone was a consumer. But with social media, everyone is a producer. What is lost in this whole excitement of the new media is the difference between a journalist in the legacy media and a content creator in what could be called other information neighborhoods. If one were to go by the Stony Brook University's Center for News Literacy, one would distinguish journalism from other neighborhoods by asking if the information you receive is verified, whether it comes from an independent source with no irons in any fire anywhere, and whether the person who puts this information out can be held accountable to it. The concept of democracy being the marketplace of ideas, working as a self-cleaning oven, is problematic because of people's cognitive limitations to deal with falsehoods that are in consonance with their own ideas, values, and interests. So gatekeeping on social media becomes challenging. Now, governments often tout regulation as the best way to deal with false information. But any government response does not take long to be authoritarian and amounting to censorship. Spontaneous events like the Arab Spring would have no chance of emerging, leave alone gaining momentum. Self-regulation, on the other hand, begs the question, who is the self and who's doing the regulating? Accusations of big tech being biased easily help some not so good actors to get around flagging by social media. More importantly, if we are asking social media companies to regulate, as Pratik says, they're part of the problem. It goes against the business model, and they're not likely to do so. So what is this business model? Now, most social media platforms make most of their money through advertising. And this is possible only if more and more people engage more often on their platforms. Therefore, the algorithms work towards increasing user engagement and promoting virality. Never mind if that means following extremist groups or hate speech. Governments often ask these companies to flag problematic content. But don't you see, they're already doing that, even though it might be inaccurate most often. But how are they doing it? They're doing it through automation and extremely lowly paid workers who live in the global south, and thereby they're minimizing their own costs. The focus then needs to be on regulating advertising and how it is targeted. Instead of collecting user data and selling it to advertisers, these companies ought to look at contextual advertising that places ads based on keywords of the content of the web page the user is viewing. But companies will definitely find ways around that too. Given the Indian context of over 20 official languages and volumes of content, none of these solutions can be long-term and effective. And these are solutions that work for social media content and not for social media messaging like WhatsApp, where the problem really lies. Fact-checking websites like all of these, Alt News and Fact Check and PolitiFact and Boom and Snopes, are doing a humongous job that is nearly Sisyphean. How many claims can they check in a day? So Pratik was saying they check 8 to 10 stories a day. And how far do these fact checks really go? How far do these fact checks go viral? Hardly any at all. Hardly any fact checks go viral. So the old adage that a lie would have gone around the world twice before the truth even has pulled its pant on is prophetic in the case of social media. Probably the best way to deal with it is also the toughest one and the most drawn out: education and media, education and news and information literacy at a very young age. You need to pass on the burden of gatekeeping and fact checking to the consumer of information, right? Who is also now the producer of information. Give them really simple tools to safely interact with information. Teach children how to look for and identify accurate and good information instead of making them learn capitals of countries or some such thing, which they can easily find in a Google search. Teach them to think critically, and you will have an informed citizenry and hopefully a robust democracy. That is all I want to say over here. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Professor Kanchan Kaur, for that extremely succinct, brief, but a wonderful go ahead. Yeah, the need of the hour to be able to inculcate habits of news literacy, to be able to inculcate habits of responsible negotiation on this information superway that we have in the form of internet and social media. It was a wonderful panel, and I am really extremely honored. I feel elated to call it, to call a close to it. Some wonderful speakers, some wonderful perspectives on behalf of Global Media Education Council. We're really thankful that you all could take out your wonderful time to honor us, to enlighten us with your valuable ideas. Of course, the times that went by the last couple of years, India has emerged as the first country which ranks, as the most misinformed country in the world. Maximum number of fake news, misinformation, and disinformation spreading in India in a survey conducted out of 138 countries. But that should not put us in a pessimistic mode, because here's some way forward. Here's some solutions which are coming from the horse's mouth. Aditi has given us some brief, some wonderful, what should I say, key areas and takeaways, how we can kind of try to inculcate, these strategies, even while training journalists in university and higher education centers and institutes. I'm very thankful to Professor Farhad Bashir Khan, sir, who has also kind of, again, reiterated this never-ending, an undermined idea that, how important it is in a democracy that you have a free and a fair kind of a press, and that these issues just do not pertain to climate misinformation, but to all kinds of social issues. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Professor Kaur, Professor F.B. Khan. Thank you, Aditi. Pratik, of course, had an engagement, so he's left early, but he also kind of gave a very succinct view about the entire situation. I'm thankful to all of you. Thank you. Good night.